city of Lakewood in 1971, and he was one of the first people I met. Not too long ago, I was talking with one of my brothers who is into the family history, which in my family is a very interesting pastime. And he was in central New York, in some little towns, tracking down some record. And we were chatting on the phone, and he said, you know, I was just in this old courthouse looking at family records from this little town from the 1760s. And they told me I was going to have to go back east where the really old towns. In that context, 1969 is not very long ago. But it's long enough for the city of Lakewood to emerge as one of the most energetic and vital communities in Colorado. That has an awful lot to do, I think, with the people who were there and helped the people of vision who put this city together in a very, very difficult series of processes. Only some of which I know, and we'll hear, I hope, the rest of them this afternoon. Jim is one of the first people I met. Came into my office over at 20th and Youngfield in an old dime store and said, you know, Lakewood could use some more libraries. And as part of that city's vitality, we have some nice libraries in Lakewood. And the city has had an awful lot to do with that. People who put it together helped us get our work done as well. So, enjoy this afternoon. Jim has consented to give us some of the history and background. It'll be fun to hear what it was like to have been present at the creation. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. I'm going to use this mic because my voice is not strong for so long. You know, it's fun to have these kinds of get-togethers. I see a lot of familiar faces. In fact, at least on more than one occasion as I walked in, somebody said I was looking good. You know, there are only three age groups: the young, the middle-aged, and gee, you're looking good. I didn't know what kind of a crowd to expect, so to reinforce things, I asked my wife, Betty, if you'd raise your hand, and two of my daughters, Kathy and Nancy, to be here in case there was not anybody here. But I am pleased that not only are they here, but a couple of my successors and mayors, Mayor Linda Shaw and Mayor Linda Morton, are here. And a couple members of council, one former and one present, Kathy Stapleton and Debbie Coop are both here. In the presentation, in the material that the library put out, I was pleased that they used the word conversation with Jim Richey, because I don't plan to lecture for an hour. Rather, I'd like to enter into a conversation and feel that at any time, if you want to raise your hand, we don't have to wait till the end to ask questions. I'm going to start by going back to about the end of World War II. The end of World War II, Colorado became very attractive for many people who were stationed here during the war, and that was true particularly of the Denver area, and became especially true of eastern Jefferson County that Lakewood's a part of. Primarily, I think, or a major reason being that land values were much more negotiable in eastern Jefferson County than what they were in southeast and east Denver. So as a result, it kind of grew like Topsy. The R1 school system consolidated, became a one school system as opposed to numerous. I don't know how many, but I think there were about 30-some, 39? Thanks, Kay. And those, that consolidation of the school district led to one of the things that I think, in my judgment, was led to the success of the 5th incorporation election. There were 4 prior elections, or prior attempts, to incorporate eastern Jefferson County before 1969, and they all failed, obviously. In the spring of 1969, there was some rumbling on the part of the city and county of Denver of expanding their corporate limits or their city limits. In the process, I think a lot of the pride that Jefferson County residents had developed in their school system was one of the factors that led to a turnout for the June of '69 election. The other one that was equally important had to do with police protection, or more especially what was known as the garage rapist. There was an individual that during daylight hours had been attacking women here in eastern Jefferson County. And the amount of police protection, or more especially protection by the Sheriff's Department, led to a major concern. Give you an idea about the depth of that protection. At any one shift, there were only 2.5 patrol cars from the Sheriff's Department available to patrol all of what is now Lakewood. So, between the pride in the school system and the fear that if Denver were to expand and come over into eastern Jefferson County, the school system would revert to Denver, and the concern about the police protection, there was success in June of 1969, led to the election. I happened to chair that effort. I remember the evening of, I think it was 15th and Colfax, where the old Jefferson Bank, behind it they had a kind of a party house, and we had a celebration party, and in the pouring of champagne and so on, someone said, "There's the mayor." Well, I didn't disagree, but I hadn't thought much about it. We had 60 days by state statute to lead up to the first election, which was scheduled for August of 1969. In that first election, there were 113 candidates for 13 offices. There was the mayor, 10 members of the council, the city clerk, and the city treasurer. And we had meetings oftentimes, not sometimes, but oftentimes, where the candidates outnumbered the people in attendance. We had one weekend in the old Villa Italia Mall that they had given to us to campaign, and our desk were all set up, and our families were there and so on, and we were handing out literature. Well, as time passed, we realized that 40% of the people in shopping Villa Italia were not residents of Lakewood. That was okay, we became better acquainted. Well, somehow, some way, the citizens got through the 113 candidates. There were 13 of them for mayor, and I happened to be successful. I was the first mayor in the history of the world, I think, that announced for re-election about 2 weeks after I had been elected. The reason for that was by state statute, a statutory city had to have an election in November of the odd year, and that was the odd year. So I stood for election 2 months after that. The most important thing, perhaps, that came out of that period of time in that 2 months was the fact that we went to the county attorney, to the courts, with the name of Jefferson City, and that was the name we were incorporated under, Jefferson City, Colorado. Nobody liked it. I don't know who picked it out, but we wanted to be neutral because there were many neighborhood groups that we did not want to alienate by having a particular name such as Lakewood. But after the election, everybody, there's a real groundswell of let's change the name. So as an advisory issue in November of 1969, the city council was advised by every precinct to change the name from Jefferson City to Lakewood. And that's how we got from point A to point B. Woke up in August after the successful election, realized that we had a city of 90-some thousand people. We had no employees, we had no ordinances, we had no rolling stock, we had no money, but we did have a few headaches. In fact, it reminds me of a story of a fellow who was walking along and slipped down this ledge and was hanging on with one hand to this limb. And he looked up and he said, "Is anybody up there?" No response. "Is anybody up there?" And this loud booming voice said, "I'm here." He said, "Who is it?" He said, "I'm the Lord." He said, "Really?" He said, "Yes." He said, "If you have faith, let go." He said, "Is anybody else up there?" Well, we kind of wondered for a period of time if anybody else was up there, because we were fortunate that we had the authority to levy a sales tax. We didn't have the call it the Bruce activity where you have to carry everything to a vote. So we levied a 1.5% sales tax, which helped us to have some resources. And we also were able to establish franchise fees with the utilities. It gave us some income, some way to get started. But the city council meetings were often and long. They weren't scheduled on any particular day. They were just, as the mayor said, let's get together tomorrow. And as we could find a school cafeteria to attend. If you've ever tried to put 200 and some pounds on a third grade or second grade little round stool, it's not easy. But that's what we were doing, and we were making our way through all the things that we thought made sense. We were assisted by Mother Nature in, I think it was September of '69, that we had a very, very unusual snowstorm. In fact, it was unusual in the sense it was about 20-some inches, and it broke down many of the limbs, many of the trees, the whole deal in town. And the city council and the mayor, we were very anxious to prove our worth. And one of the members of council had some input, was in the trash hauling business. So he knew some of the trash haulers. In fact, he knew all of them. And we got together a group of them, and they agreed that if we would furnish the labor, they would furnish the trucks. Sounded like a good deal. So we got behind these trash trucks, the city council and the mayor, and went door to door picking up limbs and trees and so on. There was a guy, he's probably still living, because I know he's a lot younger than I am, by the name of Alex Gerlach, that was in the trash business from Wheat Ridge. He had a brand new unit, and he furnished this unit. In the enthusiasm of picking up limbs, a couple of members of the council picked up a tree that had to be 2 feet in diameter, put that in the back, and ruined whatever it is that the trash truck has. So Alex and the mayor had some discussions afterwards about how nice I was before and not quite as nice afterwards, but it worked out. One of the early things that one of the members of council, Betty Miller, and myself and a fellow that was a professor at the University of Denver University at that time, by the name of Dave Fletcher, that we recognized what we perceived to be an opportunity to create a police department that was truly unique. And we kind of brainstormed, well, what should we do or what could we do that might break the mold of what old police departments are thought of. And one of the big things that we identified was the fact that they had a military image. You know, the corporal, the major, the sergeant, and so on down the lines. So we came up with the idea, which leads me to my uniform of the day, that we had kind of a gray slacks and blue blazers, and we called the policemen agents. And as they advanced in the responsibility, they were called AICs, which we knew stood for Agent in Charge. But I've kept a story over the years, and I don't think I've ever read this to either of the mayors. This story kind of illustrates to me what we were in. It's a story about what you euphemistically refer to as a bathroom, what the English call a water closet, or for short, a WC. An English woman preparing for a summer holiday in Switzerland wrote to a schoolmaster there and asked him to help her find a place to stay, quote, preferably with a WC close by. The schoolmaster, ignorant of what a WC was, showed the letter to the parish priest. Together they pondered the problem, finally deciding the initials stood for Wayside Chapel. Accordingly, the schoolmaster penned this reply to the lady. Dear Madam, I take great pleasure in informing you that the WC is situated 9 miles from your home. It is capable of holding 229 people, and it is open on Sunday and Thursday only. As there are a great many people during the summer months, I suggest that you arrive early, although there is plenty of standing room as a rule. You will be glad to hear that a number of people bring their lunch and make a day of it, while others arrive by car, make it just in time. I would like to recommend that you go on Thursday when there is musical accompaniment. It may interest you to know that my daughter was married in the WC. I can remember well the rush for seats. There were 10 people to a seat where there were normally only one. It was wonderful to see the expressions on their faces. I shall be delighted to reserve the best seat for you if you wish, where you will be seen by all. For the children, there is a special time so they will not disturb the elders, hoping to have been of service. Well, that little story illustrates why an AIC really should have been a sergeant, because as we would communicate with other agencies, like in New York City, they'd call Lakewood and they'd say, who am I talking with? And I said, this is AIC Jones. I said, who? Well, the police department, as I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, know, has been one of the true prides of Lakewood over the time. At my last count, there were over 60 individuals that had left Lakewood to become chiefs of other departments around the country. At Christmas time, I still get correspondence from agents who were brand new recruits at that time. We had some unusual experiences in the department. We shot a target of having 30 people, each of whom had a college degree. We finally got our 30, and we went on the street. A big day. I was holding a press conference that day on some other subject, and I can't remember what it was, but there was a reporter for the Denver Post that kept raising his hand to be recognized. I finally recognized him, and he said, Mr. Mayor, do you realize that your police department has arrested a funeral procession going south on Wadsworth today? I smiled and I said, no, but we shouldn't do that. The police reputation has unfolded in a constant positive way. We made one early mistake that in hindsight, I'm not sure we've done it any differently, but we employed a chief police before we employed a city manager. We should have done it the other way around. But on paper, the original chief police looked like a perfect match. His academic credentials, his experiences all the way along seemed to just measure up like they should. The only problem is when he got on board, almost from the outset, he alienated virtually every surrounding department, the sheriff, the Denver PD, the FBI. I still have and still carry with me what I call a Procter & Gamble management pad. This pad, that's probably 40 years old. And I took that pad and started going out in the street with some of the agents, and in essence asking them what it was that they did not like about the job. Obviously there were things that they liked or they wouldn't be here. But the bottom line is that we made a decision that we should replace and had to replace that chief, and we did so, and his successor was as strong as the first one was weak, a fellow named Pierce Brooks. Pierce was a retired captain from the LAPD, had been involved in that Onion Field killing as the lead detective, and he was truly a policeman's policeman. All the people, I think 100%, I've never heard anybody in the agency that had anything but kind words of respect for Pierce Brooks. The story, you remember a time had marched on and Pierce had retired, and his successor was Charlie Johnson, who's now retired also. But we had that terrible incident with President Reagan, where the attempt on his life, and the fellow's name escapes me, John. Without you, I'd never be a success. John Hinckley. Hinckley, the background was identified that he was from Evergreen, or his parents, and Charlie Johnson, the new chief, gets a call from Pierce Brooks, who's now retired and enjoying retirement. He says, Charlie, here's what you do. And he gave him 1, 2, 3, 4 about what actions that he should take. And Charlie not only responded to that, but he told me in later times how much he appreciated that, because it was an experience that no one had been through, and I'm not sure he would have done it quite that way. The agency, police agency, has now got its, I think about 5th chief. I know there's John Vermillion in between, but Ron Burns, that some of you may have met, appears to me to be as strong as anybody we could have hoped for. He's young, he's enthusiastic, and he is excited about the history of Lakewood as well as the future. A lot of things have happened in Lakewood, and I could go on and on with stories, but at the outset, the mayor and the council also was a liquor licensing authority. We hadn't established a liquor license yet. We had a kind of a nightclub or bar on Colfax that had given us trouble, and so they were called before council to respond to their activities, and in the process it kind of drug on, and we wound up with a couple of agents living in our home for a few days because I'd had threats against my life. And that was the time that our youngest daughter, who's not here tonight, and I will let her know tonight how much she's missed, but our youngest daughter was having her 13th birthday, and she had invited a half dozen or more of her close 13-year-old friends over for a slumber party. Well, you know, we can't tell her to cancel the slumber party. So they all show up, and we had a basement downstairs that was kind of the rec room. And this one agent was a female agent who's still with the department and is on the command staff. And she said, girls, I want you to have fun. I want you to go on with your activities just as though nothing was, we weren't upstairs. The only thing I ask of you, if you hear any gunshots, drop to the floor and stay there. Can you imagine the stories that those kids must have taken home about, let us tell you the night we spent with the mayor. The fact that we had enthusiasm, and I say we collectively with the council and the city clerk and the treasurer and everyone, helped us over a lot of rough hills. The need for annexation, the need for doing something with the park system, the need for having capital equipment that we didn't have from scratch was obvious, but how do you get from point A to point B wasn't quite as obvious. I can remember the extension of Kipling Avenue what is now Kipling Avenue, was a highly controversial subject. It's a classic example of NIMBY, not in my backyard, that as we tried to identify specific routes where Kipling Avenue might travel, there was just nothing but obstacles. It seemed that there was always a property or properties plural that stood in the way of how do you get from A to B. But we eventually got there, and I think people now travel Kipling and don't realize what it took to do that. There's another example of a road, the extension of Estes from Jewel down to whatever that street is down the hill. Yeah, to Morrison Road. The extension of that, again, was a controversial thing. People would have looked you in the eye and agree, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We need something through there. Okay, well, here's what we plan. No, not that. But those things took place. I go back to kind of backtrack. In the spring of '69, as we conceptually thought about the incorporation, it was anything but total agreement. In fact, there was major opposition from a group that were really headquartered, and I think wanted to call themselves Alameda, and 4 or 5 individuals that were very, very strong and very active in opposing the concept of our taking this over, because the original boundaries of Lakewood were drawn by me in our basement on a ping pong table with a felt pen. He said, here we go, or like this. And in the process, some of the people who had lived in the Alameda area for years and years simply did not want to lose their identity. And much like what is now Wheat Ridge wanted to keep their identity, the Alameda part wanted to keep theirs. Well, it got so controversial that we agreed that we would have a meeting at Alameda High School in the auditorium, and after the debate, we'd ask for a show of hands, and based on that show of hands, either they would support me or I would support them for the concept of which way do we go. Well, at the end of the meeting, we asked for a show of hands, and I don't think it was unanimous, but it was so close to unanimous that the 4 individuals who had been so vocal and so active turned right around and were just as vocal and just as active supporting the concept. One of those people was Bob Clements, that some of you are very moved. And Bob, you know, when he had his hearing aid turned on, he could be very attentive. And but the fact that, you know, we didn't have a plan that went too far beyond. I had a young fellow who's now one of the chiefs that came from Lakewood by the name of Greg Morrison, who's chief in Grand Junction now. He called me about a month ago and said that he was working on a doctorate at Colorado, and he'd like to visit with me about the background of the department and so on and so forth. And you realize that history has really stayed strong and stayed sound over the years. I'm going to refer to my notes here because, I know I wanted to talk about the City Hall. We had a need for a City Hall. I mean, we had to eventually graduate from those high school or grade school cafeterias. And I had been on the school board not too many years before that. And I still had friends in the administration and on the board. And after the June election creating the city, I went to some of these people and I asked them, I said, look, they had 1580 Yarrow, which is now the Clements Senior Center. They had that property on the market. That was the old school administration years ago. And I said, don't get too excited about selling that, because if we're successful, if I'm successful as mayor, I want to negotiate with you on that property. Well, I was successful, and that next week I contacted these people, and the asking price was $300,000 for that building. And I said, you know, as far as I'm concerned, that's fine, but it seems to me we probably ought to get an up-to-date appraisal just to be sure we're in the ballpark. So we did, and it came in at $180,000. Well, I said, you know, it just occurred to me, we represent, we meaning the new city, approximately 40% of the population of Jefferson County. So in essence, we have already paid for 40% of those bricks and mortars. So we ought to reduce the price by 40%. I said, well, it makes sense. So now we're down to 112,000. I said, we've got one more little problem. We don't have any money. Could we pay for it over 7 years with no interest? I said, okay. Well, that's how the original City Hall came into being. Well, I'm sure there's been many, many thousands of dollars more than the 112 paid for in just remodeling over there. Although I don't know how many of you are familiar with Garrison Street, but there was a family by the name of John Hayden family that owned all that land from Garrison out to the Hogback. That was all the Hayden Ranch. And there used to be, and I don't know, I haven't been down Garrison a long time, but there used to be 2 posts along about 2nd or 3rd and Garrison on the west side of the street that were the identifying posts to the entrance to the Hayden Ranch. John Hayden told me the story about how when he was a kid, how he would pack up for a 2-day trip of what they call riding the fences. He would ride by horseback to test the fences, be sure that they were sound. John was quite a special guy. They lived in Phoenix, and Betty and I on Procter & Gamble trips down there would seek them out, and we began a negotiation relative to the Hayden family donating acreage. It's on top of Green Mountain. And it wound up that, sure enough, they did donate 500 acres, which became the start of that whole Green Mountain Park area. John was a tough guy. You had to do one thing that I forced myself to do, but when you met with him, he insisted that you have a full glass full of straight Scotch. And it was who could handle it the best, and I knew it. If I really didn't sip this, that who was going to win, it wasn't going to be me. Things that we take for granted now that's happened over the years, such as the park system. The park system, you had a small Lakewood park system. You had a very major foothills recreation district, and both had that proprietary interest of not wanting to lose their identities. And so they became not really supporters of the concept of merging. But as time went on, they did merge, and now as you drive around, you can see the extensive park system. The Edinbrook Park deal was another tough nut to crack. The Edinbrook family had no desire to part with that land for any reason, and so it was many hours of negotiation. The Lakewood Fire Protection District and the old Bancroft, again, were as proprietary and as proud as they could be of their systems, of their own organizations. They each had their own boards, each had their own agenda. Bancroft was primarily volunteer, and Lakewood was strictly salaried. Well, I had left office many years before, and I don't know whether it was under Mayor Linda Shaw's, was it under your time that we finally brought it together? Long, long time coming. Things like that today we take for granted, had all kinds of tough deals. It was either in the fall of '69, again right after the deal, or perhaps it was the fall of '70. Maybe the good Lord had given us 1 year. But anyway, we had these severe rainstorms. I mean, they really came down. And in the process, there were all kinds of basements that were flooded. And City Hall, we were getting these calls about, we have water in our basement, who should we talk to? Well, we asked them, what district do you belong to? They had no idea, which I guess was understandable, but the second part of that was not quite as understandable. If you contacted the district, it might consist of 3 or 4 people, and they might office in the bedroom of one of the members. And as you contacted them, the district would say, hey, we don't have any maps, we don't know who we serve. Now, can you believe that? But that's the way it was. I called a get-together, a meeting of the boards of directors of the various special districts that we had in what was now Lakewood. And we met at the old Lakewood Junior High, it's 10th and Wadsworth. And those members of the boards literally filled that room. They didn't know each other by other boards, and I'm pretty confident there were individual boards that didn't know each other either. That hasn't been solved totally yet, 30-some years later. It's still relatively easy to form a special district. If you meet over coffee, and if you stay there long enough and the coffee holds out, you can have a special district before you break up. But it's a whole lot better now than what it was then. You know, I'm going to pause here because I definitely want opportunity for some questions, and I'm going to ask who wants to prime the pump.
I like the story about when City Hall, you first got the building and everything, and you had no furniture and a few people, and what do you do with it? Talk a bit about that.
Well, we made the deal to take over 1580 Arrow. Keep in mind it had no air conditioning. We were in there in August, and the city clerk was Jean Rogers, and Jeannie would bring a cardboard table, card table, from home, and I would bring a King Soopers basket. Is there some water back there, Kathy? That's good. I'm about to lose it. Anyway, we would meet at, that's great, thank you. Oh, it's fine. We would meet in Lakewood City Hall with all the proper decorum, with our King Super sack and our card table, and we had one phone line. And at the end of the day, I can't remember if it was Jean or whether it was me, but one of us had the responsibility of closing the windows. The other one had the responsibility of taking the wastebasket home or sack home and emptying it for the next day's work. Jeannie was a great gal. She was really the only one of the 13 that had any kind of experience whatsoever in city administration. She had been the city clerk up at Sterling, and she was kind of the mother hen for the rest of us. I mean, she literally mothered us like you can't believe. Like in all these early meetings, Jeannie would always bake brownies or cookies or something and bring to the meeting. She was kind of the catalyst, the glue that you would, that kind of held us together through those late meetings. I had been on the school board during the years that we had family living, or more properly sex education, as a subject that came up, and extremely controversial, and we knew it was going to be a big meeting. The school board did, and we met at Jefferson High School. And at Jefferson High School, again, the auditorium was filled. And two of the guys that were on the board with me, Charlie Moore and Charlie Myers, sat to my left and to my right. And about 2:30 in the morning, it had to be maybe later, I looked to the left and looked to the right, and they weren't snoring, but they sure weren't awake. And I made a vow. I said, if I ever have a gavel in my hand, we will never, ever go past midnight, no matter what the subject was. And we lived by that. I'd start the council meeting at 7. If you were there at 7:01, you were 1 minute late. And there were occasions when those study sessions would go up to midnight, but at midnight we were through. And I really believe that made a lot of sense, because as you look back, when a person loses their thought process through being tired, the decisions are not very sound. Another question? Yes?
Yeah, well, I got two questions. One question, what years were you married, Mayor? And the second question, where did you get the name Lakewood from?
Well, in backwards, Lakewood came from the fact that Lakewood High School and Lakewood Junior High had been old schools, and had, if you were to take a poll of how many recognized the name Lakewood vis-a-vis other names, it probably stood out at the top, although Alameda was very high too. In terms of the time I served from 69 to 78. By luck of the draw, I guess, by the way the city council or city charter is written, both Mayor Shaw and Mayor Morton served for 8 years. I served for a little bit longer than that because we didn't have a charter at that time. And by state statute, they had to stand for re-election every 2 years. So I actually stood for election 5 times. And seemed like it was longer than that, but it wasn't. Okay.
Was there ever any interest in, before you incorporated, in thinking about a city and county of Jefferson and having a county-wide city and county?
Not to my knowledge. I don't think that ever came up. The original intent was to incorporate all the area that is now Wheat Ridge and Lakewood. Wheat Ridge made known early in the game that they really didn't want any part of it. In fact, they were so vocal and so active that they actually had their incorporation election 1 week before we did. The first mayor at that time was a fellow by the name of Ed Anderson, and Ed called me at home one time between the June elections and before August. He said, "Can I come over and visit?" And I said, "Sure." Now it had to be before June because it was before the elections. I said, "Sure, come on over." He said, "You know, my mother lives at 32nd and Youngfield. Would you mind redrawing that so that she can be in the deal?" I said, "No big deal." So we got the felt pen out and we redrew it. But, so we were unofficial. Yes, ma'am.
Well, you talk about drawing the outline for the city on your ping pong table. What determined in your mind whether people were in Lakewood or out of Lakewood? How did you decide that?
A lot of sophistication.
Would you like to?
Sheridan became the easy one because that was on the west, and Hamden became a relatively easy one because it was on the south. Now, as we got to the north, we got with Ed Anderson's mother, and we had to jiggle around a little bit. And on the west, it was also a little jiggling, but it was as unsophisticated in action as it sounds as I recall it.
And what happened to the map?
To the map, I think Betty tore it up with all the other trash. No, seriously, we had to go to the court with it, and probably the court, the judge did with that as he put his archives together. Yes?
You mentioned that there was a concern about Denver annexing part of what is now Lakewood. Were there any actual plans, or do you have any evidence that they were actually going to take steps to take that annexation?
Well, we don't have anything on paper, but we had it from about as official as you could be, in the sense that Bill McNichols was mayor, and we became very, very good friends. And Bill confirmed the activity to me, and his assistant was a fellow by the name of Dick Batterton, I believe it was. No, that's not right. He was, but anyway, his number one assistant also became friends after many years. At the outset, he was much of an adversary, but he also shared that. Bill McNichols and I, as I say, he's a great guy, and we would, on these mayor's conferences, pair up and decide what our travel schedules would be. And I want to be careful in telling this, but I'm going to tell it like it is. And we had gone to Milwaukee for a conference of mayors. And Bill was by himself, and Betty was with me. And we had the incoming president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors was a fellow from Newark. I shouldn't remember his name, but I can't. But he was a black fellow, very talented. And we got invitations slid under our doors, Bill did and I did, to come to a reception in the hotel at 4 o'clock that afternoon. And so one of us called the other and said, should we go? And yeah, let's go. So Betty goes with us, and we walk in. We're the only white people in the whole facility. They have about a 30-piece band that is really going. I mean, they are jumping. So Bill turns to Betty and he says, "You want to dance the Black Bottom Waltz?" But that's as much official confirmation as I had, but I think it was enough that I can't even think a lot of things I can't remember. Told Mayor Shaw earlier I wear a name tag at home now. But I can't remember what the occasion was, but the confirmation of their intent was strong enough that I believed it. There was a lady, and she, Linda's helped me, okay. She was, I think, in the state legislature, and she had something to do with. She had a lot to do with the legislation that precluded Denver from going any further. Frida Poundstone. I knew I'd never forget that name.
She was not in the state legislature.
She what?
She was never in the state legislature.
She was never in the state. Well, she was very active. They call it the Poundstone Amendment. But that didn't exist in '69. Another one.
How does a city get incorporated? Do they have to go through the state legislature?
No, you have to go to the courts. You go to the county court, in this case Jefferson County Court. You have to have a name that you're proposing. You have to have boundaries drawn that you're proposing. And I'm not sure whether you have to have the date of the election or the court sets that. But in essence, those are the two big things that you need. You gotta have a boundary, you gotta have a name.
Do they set the election date then at that time, or you recommend a date we're asking them?
You know, I cannot recall that with accuracy, but I tend to think that we also went to the court with the date that we wanted the election. I'm pretty sure that's right because in Wheat Ridge case, as I mentioned, they got on the other side of us by 1 week. Well, it's been fun. We don't have to go all the way to 4 o'clock unless there are others. I hope this has been helpful to you. It's fun on my part to doing it because it causes me to kind of refresh my memory, and I hold on to those notes because I don't have to prepare anything. I just go and get the notes. Thanks a lot.